Grace woke up before dawn, when the city was still asleep. At 15, her responsibility was to sell sweets on the streets to support her family. With a serene expression, she arranged the small wooden stall, carefully placing the brigadeiros and cocodas she had prepared the night before. Ethan, her father, watched her with a mix of pride and sadness, sitting in his wheelchair, a result of an accident that had changed their lives. "You're stronger than you think, my daughter," he would often say as she prepared for another day of work. Ethan had always been a strong man, but the accident left him paraplegic, confined to a wheelchair. Grace remembered the stories he told about the time he worked as a mechanic, when his hands could still feel the metal and oil of the machines. Now, he spent his days at home, limited by his lack of mobility, but never without a smile to greet Grace at the end of the day. The financial situation was tight, and Grace knew that every sweet sold was a small victory against adversity. The city streets were a daily challenge. Grace faced judging looks from people who didn't know her story. "Look at that, a girl selling sweets. Where are her parents?" she once overheard from a hurried woman. But Grace, with a quiet determination, continued her work, ignoring the hurtful comments. Every smile from a satisfied customer was a reminder that, despite the difficulties, she was doing her best to keep her family united and safe. The intense traffic and scorching heat did not discourage her. She walked from car to car, offering her sweets with a smile. "Would you like to try a brigadeiro? They're fresh," was her usual phrase, spoken with contagious energy. She knew that, for many, her sweets were a small luxury in the midst of a monotonous routine. And for her, every coin received meant another meal on her family's table. The daily battle was tough, but Grace kept her head high, knowing that her determination was an invisible force pushing her forward. At the end of the day, Grace would return home exhausted but with a heart full of hope. Ethan waited for her with a cup of tea, a ritual they both cherished. "How was your day today?" he would ask as she collapsed on the sofa. Between sips of tea and laughter, they shared the small victories and challenges of the day. Despite all the difficulties, there was an undeniable bond between them, a connection strengthened by necessity and unconditional love. "One day, things will get better," Grace would say, more to herself than to Ethan. Despite the challenges, there was a routine that kept them strong. Grace took care of the house, did the shopping, and made sure Ethan took his medication. It was a simple life, but full of moments of affection and understanding. The neighbors watched with admiration the strength of the girl and the care she showed for her father. "You're a true warrior, Grace," said Dona Marta, the neighbor from downstairs, one time, and Grace, with a shy smile, would thank her, knowing that the real battle was still to come. Deep in her heart, Grace carried the hope of a better future. She dreamed of studying, having a career, and providing a more comfortable life for Ethan. Meanwhile, she continued her daily routine, selling sweets with the same enthusiasm and determination. The difficulties were many, but her courage was greater. And so, day after day, Grace and Ethan faced life's challenges together, with the certainty that, despite everything, they were a strong and united family. The accident was a turning point in the lives of Ethan and Grace. Before the tragedy, Ethan was an active man, full of life, dedicated to his mechanic workshop. Valerie, his wife, was the foundation of the family, always with a smile on her face. That fateful day, however, marked the end of an era. Ethan still vividly remembered the headlights, the sound of the impact, and the deafening silence that followed. The car rolled over several times before coming to a stop, and Valerie did not survive. He woke up days later in the hospital, only to discover that he could no longer walk. The news of Valerie's death devastated everyone, but for Ethan, the grief was even more excruciating. He not only lost his wife but also the ability to walk, becoming dependent on a wheelchair. Grace, still very young, had to mature quickly to deal with the new reality. The girl, who once had a typical school life, was now the main caretaker of her father and herself. Ethan, consumed by guilt and sorrow, questioned himself daily about what he could have done differently. The transition to their new life was difficult. Ethan had to abandon his workshop, And with that, they lost the family's primary source of income. The savings quickly ran out, and they were forced to sell the house and move to a small apartment in the suburbs. Grace, who always had a resilient spirit, decided to start selling sweets to help with the expenses. "We'll get through this, Dad. I promise," she said with conviction, trying to bring a bit of light to the dark days. Ethan, despite the physical and emotional pain, clung to his daughter's strength like an anchor. Ethan's recovery days were long and painful. He spent months in physical therapy, trying to regain as much mobility as possible, though he knew he would never walk again. The doctors were honest, explaining that the spinal injury was irreversible. Grace was always by his side, encouraging him to keep going. "You're stronger than you think," she repeated, echoing the words he used to say to her. This mutual support strengthened the bond between father and daughter even more, despite the difficulties. Looking back, Ethan couldn't avoid the feeling of guilt. He blamed himself for driving that night, for not protecting Valerie, for leaving his family in such a vulnerable situation. However, Grace never blamed him. To her, the accident was an unavoidable tragedy, and her focus was on moving forward. "We're in this together," she would say, reinforcing the idea that, no matter what happened, they were a team. And so, day by day, they rebuilt their lives one step at a time. The community around them was supportive but also filled with curiosity and speculation. Many asked about the accident, about how Ethan was coping with everything. Grace, always protective, avoided talking about the matter with strangers. She knew that words could be sharp weapons, and the last thing she wanted was for her father to feel even more exposed. So she maintained a reserved posture, focusing only on her small family and how they could move forward. "What matters is what we have now," she would say, trying to put the past aside. Ethan, in turn, found a new sense of purpose through small projects at home. He started fixing things, adapting the workshop to his limited reach. "I can still do something useful," he thought as he worked with his hands on small engines and appliances. This new routine brought a bit of normalcy to their lives. Grace, always cheerful, helped as much as she could, learning more about mechanics and feeling more connected to her father. Despite the limitations, they found a way to continue together with hope and determination. Helen, Ethan's mother, was a rigid and distant figure. Since the accident that left her son paraplegic and took her daughter-in-law Valerie, Helen had become even more bitter. She never showed compassion for the situation Ethan and Grace were in. "You've always made the wrong decisions," she would say, needling Ethan with each visit. To Helen, the accident wasn't just a tragedy, but a confirmation that her son was incapable of taking care of himself, let alone his daughter. The relationship between Ethan and Helen had always been tense, but it worsened after the accident. Helen disapproved of Ethan's choices ever since he decided to pursue a career as a mechanic instead of seeking a more respectable life. The tragedy was the last straw for her. "Look where your choices have led you," she would say with thinly veiled disdain. Ethan, in turn, always felt diminished in his mother's presence, especially now that his independence was limited. Instead of offering support, Helen seemed to relish the opportunity to reinforce her criticisms. Helen also didn't hide her displeasure with the family's financial situation. "You're her father. It's your responsibility to provide," she insisted, ignoring the fact that Ethan was already doing the best he could. To her, Grace selling sweets on the streets was an affront to the family's dignity. However, instead of helping, Helen only complained and made demands. Her coldness and lack of empathy made the visits unbearable. Grace, always diplomatic, tried to keep the peace despite Helen's evident resentment. "We're doing our best, Grandma," she would reply, trying not to be affected. Helen's relationship with Grace was equally complicated. Although she was her granddaughter, Helen never showed any real affection for her. To Helen, Grace was just another consequence of Ethan's poor choices. She never acknowledged the girl's strength and determination in helping the family. "You should be in school, not on the streets," Helen would criticize without offering an alternative. Grace, though hurt, always maintained her composure. She knew arguing with her grandmother was pointless. "I just want her to care," she once confided to Ethan, revealing her frustration. Despite the harsh words, there were moments when Helen seemed to show a glimpse of humanity. During one visit, Grace found an old photograph of Ethan as a child, smiling next to Helen. The image was a reminder of happier times. "He was a boy full of potential," Helen commented, almost nostalgically. Grace then realized that beneath Helen's hardness was a woman who also felt the pain of loss and difficult choices. These rare moments of vulnerability revealed a complexity that Helen rarely let show. Ethan, for his part, avoided talking about Helen whenever he could. He knew his mother had never accepted his way of life and that Valerie's loss only reinforced her disapproval. Ethan also felt the constant pressure to be something he never wanted to be, someone who met Helen's unrealistic expectations. "She'll never change," he would say to Grace, resigned. But Grace, with her optimistic spirit, still believed there was hope for her grandmother's redemption. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she would say, more to herself than to her father. Despite everything, Grace continued to visit Helen, trying to maintain a thread of family connection. She believed that, somehow, she could help her grandmother overcome her bitterness. Helen, however, remained steadfast in her critical and demanding stance. To her, the past suffering justified her behavior, and she saw no reason to change. "You're too young to understand," she would say, shutting down any of Grace's attempts to discuss their relationship. Thus, the family dynamic remained complex and tense, with Grace trying to find a balance between Helen's expectations and Ethan's needs. It was a day like any other when Grace, selling her sweets at the traffic light, spotted a man who intrigued her. He was inside a luxurious car, and his resemblance to Ethan was striking. "He looks like Dad," she thought, watching him as he drove by. The image of the man lingered in her mind, and in the following days, she saw him several times, always at the same time and in the same place. Grace's curiosity grew with each casual encounter, until she decided to approach him. Gathering her courage, she walked up to the car and, with evident nervousness, asked, "Do you know Ethan?" The man, surprised by the unexpected question, introduced himself as Henry Williams, a successful businessman. Henry was taken aback by Grace's question, but his expression soon softened as he noticed the sincerity in the girl's eyes. "No, I don't know any Ethan," he replied, although something in his eyes hinted at a spark of recognition. Grace, holding a photo of her father in her hand, persisted, showing the picture to Henry. "He's my dad, and you look a lot like him," she stated, her voice carrying a mixture of hope and doubt. Henry, upon seeing the photo, became visibly shaken. The encounter left Henry deep in thought. He had always known he was adopted, but had never learned any details about his biological family. The resemblance to the man in the photo was undeniable, and a strange sense of familiarity washed over him. He asked Grace to meet him the next day at the same place, but this time he wanted to have a deeper conversation. The following day, as he stopped at the traffic light, Henry invited Grace to get into his car. The girl, though hesitant, felt she needed to uncover the truth. "Let's go to my building. We have a lot to talk about," he said as Grace got into the car, trying to keep calm. On the way, Henry explained a bit about his life. He was a successful businessman but had always felt that something was missing, a piece of the puzzle of his story. Grace listened intently, absorbing every word. In the restaurant of the building, Henry and Grace settled at a table near the window, watching the bustling city outside. The environment was elegant, a stark contrast to what Grace was used to. Henry, anxious and with a mix of apprehension, began the conversation. "Tell me about your father," he gently requested, trying to ease the moment. Grace, still a bit nervous, started talking about Ethan, his life, and how he faced adversity. "He's a strong man, even with everything that happened," she said, with evident pride in her voice. As Grace narrated the difficulties they faced, Henry listened intently. She spoke about the accident that left Ethan paraplegic and her father's daily struggle to maintain his dignity. Henry, visibly moved, shared that he had always known he had a twin brother but never had the chance to meet him. My biological mother always spoke about the brother who was taken, he revealed with a sad look. Grace, surprised, realized that Henry was referring to her grandmother, Helen. She said she suffered greatly because of it, he added, his voice thick with emotion. Henry recounted that his biological mother, Mary, never fully recovered from the loss of the other son who was stolen from the maternity ward. Mary married later, but the pain of the loss always lingered. She tried to find him but never succeeded, Henry explained. Grace, feeling the weight of the revelation, remained silent for a moment. "So you always knew?" she asked, trying to grasp the complexity of the situation. Henry nodded, explaining that he learned the story when he was already an adult. The revelation brought a new perspective to Grace. She had never imagined that her family history was so complex. "I never knew my father had a twin brother, let alone that he was stolen," she confessed, still processing the information. Henry, understanding Grace's shock, held her hand and said, "I always wanted to find him, but I feared it was too late." The emotion was palpable, and Grace felt an immediate connection with Henry. The pain he described about the loss of his brother and the sadness of his biological mother was tangible. Henry decided that the next step would be to bring Ethan and Mary together. "My mother needs to meet the son she lost," he said with determination. Grace, though nervous, agreed. She knew that this reunion would be a milestone in everyone's lives. Henry also suggested a DNA test to confirm what they both already felt to be true. "We need to be sure," he stated seriously. Grace, understanding the gravity of the moment, agreed. The idea that her grandmother Helen had been responsible for so much suffering was difficult to accept but necessary for the truth to finally come to light. The meeting ended with a feeling of hope and uncertainty. Henry promised Grace that he would do everything to help Ethan and provide a dignified family reunion. "My mother has waited for this moment her whole life," he said, his eyes shining. Grace, touched by Henry's sincerity, felt relieved knowing they were not alone on this journey. "We're in this together," she replied with a shy smile. As they left the restaurant, both knew that this meeting was just the beginning of a new and challenging chapter. Henry, determined, began planning the meeting between Ethan and Mary. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary for everyone to finally move forward. "We'll organize everything carefully," he promised Grace as they said their goodbyes. Grace, in turn, was eager to tell Ethan about Henry and Mary. The possibility of reuniting with their biological family and finally understanding their past was both exciting and frightening. And so, they left the restaurant, ready to face the truths that were about to be revealed. On the day of the DNA test, the atmosphere was filled with anticipation and nervousness. Grace and Ethan arrived at Henry's office, where they were greeted with a warm smile. Henry made sure to explain each step of the process, trying to put everyone at ease. "This is just a formality, but it's important that we're certain," Henry said in a reassuring tone. The test was conducted quickly and efficiently, but the wait for the results felt endless. While they waited, Henry took the opportunity to share more about his own experience over the years. "I always knew I was adopted, but I never had the courage to look for my biological family," he revealed, with a thoughtful look. Grace and Ethan listened intently, absorbing every detail. Henry explained that his biological mother, Mary, often spoke about the son she lost, but he never knew the darker details of her story. "She said she could never get over the pain of losing her other son," he remarked with a saddened expression. The results finally arrived, bringing a mix of emotions. The test confirmed what everyone had already suspected. Ethan and Henry were twin brothers. The revelation was a moment of relief and emotion for everyone. Henry, visibly moved, hugged Ethan tightly. "I always knew something was missing in my life," he said, tears in his eyes. Ethan, still stunned, managed to return the embrace, feeling an unexpected connection with the brother he never knew existed. For Grace, the moment was a blend of joy and surprise, knowing that her family had just grown in an unexpected way. The revelation also stirred conflicting emotions in Ethan. He was happy to finally meet his brother, But he also felt deep anger towards his mother, Helen, for having stolen his life and separated the family. "She never said anything about you," he remarked, shaking his head in disbelief. Henry, trying to calm his brother, suggested they focus on the present and the future. "What matters now is that we've found each other," he said with a sincere smile. Grace, watching the two men, felt a mix of hope and apprehension for what lay ahead. Mary's absence from the scene was a delicate topic. Henry explained that his biological mother wasn't present for personal reasons, but expressed her desire to meet Ethan when the time was right. "She's still processing all of this," he explained, looking at Grace and Ethan seriously. Ethan, though understanding, couldn't help but feel anxious to meet his biological mother. The idea of finally understanding his origins and filling in the gaps of his story was both frightening and exciting. Grace, sensing the tension, tried to lighten the moment with an encouraging smile. Despite the complexity of the situation, there was a clear consensus among everyone: the desire to reconnect and rebuild family ties. Henry promised to help Ethan and Grace in every way possible, offering not only emotional support, but also resources to improve their lives. "We have a chance to start anew," he said with determination. Ethan, still processing the revelation, agreed. He knew the road ahead would be full of challenges, but Henry's presence gave him a new perspective. "We'll face this together," he affirmed with a resolute look. As they left the office, the sense of relief and hope was palpable. Henry accompanied Grace and Ethan to the door, reaffirming his commitment to the new family he had just found. "I'm here for whatever you need," he said with a welcoming smile. Grace, her heart filled with new hopes, thanked him with a hug. Ethan, still a bit reserved, nodded in gratitude. The discovery of the DNA test results not only confirmed their biological relationship, but also marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. The meeting with Mary, Ethan, and Henry's biological mother was a moment filled with anticipation and emotion. Henry had carefully organized the visit, knowing that Mary, in her final days, longed to reunite with her lost son. Grace and Ethan were nervous, especially Ethan, who felt a mix of anxiety and apprehension. They traveled to a small town where Mary lived in a simple house surrounded by a well-tended garden. Upon arrival, they were greeted by a nurse who cared for Mary. "She's been waiting for you," the nurse said, guiding them to the living room. As they entered the room, Ethan saw Mary sitting in an armchair, a blanket covering her legs. Her eyes, though tired, sparkled with expectation. Henry was the first to approach, holding her hand. "Mom, they're here," he said with a warm smile. Mary looked at Ethan and Grace, her expression softening into an emotional smile. "Finally, you're here," she said, her voice weak but filled with love. Ethan stepped closer, feeling a wave of conflicting emotions. He had never imagined he would meet his biological mother, especially at such a delicate moment. Mary extended her trembling hand to Ethan, who gently took it. "I've waited so long for this moment," she said, tears in her eyes. Ethan, feeling the sincerity and love from Mary, squeezed her hand tenderly. "I never imagined this day would come either," he replied, his voice choked with emotion. Mary, smiling, looked at Grace. "And this is my granddaughter?" she asked, admiring the young woman with eyes full of affection. Grace, moved, nodded and stepped closer, feeling embraced by the warmth of Mary's reception. The connection was immediate and sincere, and everyone felt the weight of the story that united them. Henry and Mary began sharing stories from the past, talking about Henry's childhood and the moments Mary had always dreamed of sharing with Ethan. She spoke of how she never stopped thinking about him, even when everyone around her told her to move on. "I knew you were out there somewhere," she said, caressing Ethan's face. Mary's story, filled with pain and hope, deeply touched everyone in the room. Ethan, who had always felt disconnected from his roots, found a new understanding and acceptance. The reunion was a mix of tears and laughter. Mary, though frail, showed impressive strength as she shared her story and expressed her love for Ethan and Henry. "You were always my sons, even when you weren't with me," she affirmed, with a conviction that moved everyone. Ethan felt that, finally, a part of his life that had always been missing was being filled. Mary, seeing her sons reunited, expressed her gratitude that they had found each other and were rebuilding the family. Grace, watching the interaction between Mary and Ethan, felt grateful to be part of that moment. She knew that this meeting was an important step for everyone to reconcile with the past and move forward. Mary, with her gentle and loving manner, made Grace feel immediately part of the family. "You have a special place in my heart," Mary said, holding Grace's hand. The young woman, touched by her grandmother's words, promised that she would take care of Ethan and always keep Mary's memory alive. The time they spent together was precious and full of meaning. Mary, knowing she didn't have much time left, cherished every moment to express her love and wisdom. She shared advice and wishes for the future of Ethan, Henry, and Grace, making it clear that even after her departure, her love would continue to guide them. The reunion, though sad as it marked an imminent farewell, was also a moment of healing and renewal. Ethan, Grace, and Henry left Mary's home with hearts full of gratitude and a new sense of belonging. After the confirmation that Ethan and Henry were indeed twin brothers, Henry decided it was time to confront Helen about the past. Grace and Ethan were apprehensive, but they knew the truth needed to be brought to light. That afternoon, the three of them headed to Helen's small apartment, where she lived alone. Upon arrival, Henry took the lead and knocked on the door, determined to get answers. Helen opened the door with her usual look of disdain, but when she saw Henry, her face went pale. "What are you doing here?" she asked, visibly unsettled. Helen tried to maintain her composure, but the tension was palpable. Henry, with a firm tone, began speaking about the recent discoveries and the DNA test. "We know everything, Helen. We know you stole Ethan from our biological mother," he said, getting straight to the point. Helen remained silent for a moment, her face as rigid as stone. Grace and Ethan watched in silence, feeling the intensity of the situation. Finally, Helen broke the silence with a cold voice. "I did what I had to do." Her words sounded hollow, devoid of remorse or emotion. Ethan, unable to contain his anger, stepped forward. "You destroyed our lives. Why did you do it?" he asked, his voice trembling with indignation. Helen, keeping her expression of indifference, replied without hesitation. "You were never supposed to be born. I wanted a child for myself, and when I saw the opportunity, I took it," she stated, as if she were discussing something trivial. Grace, horrified by her grandmother's lack of remorse, held Ethan's hand, trying to offer some comfort. Helen's coldness was difficult for everyone in the room to comprehend. Henry, trying to stay calm, asked about Mary, their biological mother. "She suffered because of you, Helen. She spent her entire life searching for her lost son," he said, his tone accusatory. Helen merely shrugged. "She was weak. She didn't deserve to be your mother," she responded with a cruelty that made Grace shudder. The atmosphere grew even more tense, and for a moment, it seemed the situation might explode. But Henry, maintaining his composure, turned to Ethan and Grace. "We don't need her. We can move on without this toxicity," he said, trying to end the conversation. The confrontation brought all the repressed emotions to the surface. Ethan, visibly shaken, simply shook his head. "You were never my mother," he said with a firmness that surprised everyone. Helen, however, remained unmoved. She stepped back, as if shielding herself from any emotional connection. "I regret nothing," she declared, looking directly into Ethan's eyes. Grace, with tears in her eyes, pulled Ethan out of the apartment. She knew there was nothing more to be said. Helen's coldness was impenetrable, and trying to understand her motivations seemed an impossible task. As they left the apartment, Henry embraced Grace and Ethan. "Let's leave this behind. Helen doesn't deserve another moment of our lives," he said, with a mixture of relief and sadness. Grace agreed, feeling a weight lifted from her shoulders. Ethan, though still shaken, knew Henry was right. "She's just a part of the past," he murmured, trying to convince himself. They knew that from that moment on, it was time to focus on the future and leave behind the shadows of the past. Helen, on the other hand, remained alone, locked in her world of bitterness and unconfessed regret. Leaving Helen's apartment marked the end of a painful chapter. Although the harsh words still echoed in their minds, there was a sense of relief. The confrontation brought clarity and a sense of closure. Now, with the truth finally exposed, Henry, Ethan, and Grace were ready to move forward and build a new life together, far from Helen's lies and manipulations. "Let's find the peace we deserve," Henry said with a hopeful smile. And so, with the past finally revealed, they left, ready to face the future with a new perspective. After the confrontation with Helen, Henry, Ethan, and Grace knew they couldn't simply leave the past behind without seeking justice. The theft of Ethan and the lifelong suffering Mary endured could not go unpunished. Henry took the lead, and with the support of Ethan and Grace, decided to take legal action against Helen. "She needs to be held accountable for her actions," he stated with determination. With the help of a specialized lawyer, they began gathering all the necessary evidence and testimonies for the case. The process of building the case was arduous and emotionally draining. Grace and Ethan revisited painful moments from their past, while Henry worked tirelessly to ensure that justice would be served. "We're doing this not just for ourselves, but for Mary as well," Henry emphasized, highlighting the importance of honoring their biological mother's struggle. The legal team assisting them was struck by the gravity of the case and the coldness with which Helen had acted. "She has never shown any remorse," the lawyer noted, stressing the importance of moving the case forward. When the day of the trial finally arrived, the tension was palpable. Helen, with her usual look of disdain, was present, accompanied by her own lawyer. Ethan, though nervous, was determined to face Helen and seek justice for what she had done. The courtroom was filled with people, including some curious members of the local media, intrigued by the unusual story of twin brothers separated at birth. Henry, standing firm alongside Ethan and Grace, was resolute in his conviction that the truth would finally come to light. During the trial, emotional testimonies were heard. Ethan recounted his life story, from the theft to the difficulties he faced after the accident. Henry also gave his testimony, explaining how the discovery of the truth had impacted his family. The most moving moment was Mary's testimony, given via video conference due to her fragile health. "I spent my life searching for my lost son," she said, tears in her eyes. The strength and pain in her words touched everyone present, including the judge, who listened attentively to every detail. Helen maintained her cold demeanor throughout the trial, showing no sign of remorse or guilt. Her lawyer tried to argue that the case was old and that Helen had acted in what she believed was the best interest of the child. However, the evidence and testimonies weighed heavily against her. The coldness of her actions and lack of remorse were evident to all. The judge, in his final statement, emphasized the severity of Helen's actions and the pain she had caused to everyone involved. "Justice must prevail," he declared before announcing the sentence. The verdict was clear. Helen was convicted of kidnapping and other related crimes. The decision brought a sense of relief and justice to Ethan, Henry, and Grace. Although the sentence could not erase the suffering of the past, it provided a sense of closure. "She is finally paying for her crimes," Henry said with a sigh of relief. Ethan, though still processing everything, felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. Grace, in turn, embraced her father and her uncle, feeling that justice had been served. With Helen's conviction, the family could finally begin to leave the past behind and focus on the future. Henry, Ethan, and Grace knew that although the road to justice had been difficult, it was necessary for them to move forward. "Now we can start healing our wounds," Ethan said, with a renewed sense of hope. Mary, upon hearing the sentence, also expressed her relief, though she knew there was still a long road of emotional recovery ahead. The pursuit of justice had been a crucial step toward reconciliation and the building of a new life. After the turbulent legal process and Helen's conviction, Henry knew it was time to help Ethan find a new purpose in life. On a sunny afternoon, Henry invited Ethan and Grace for lunch at a charming cafe in the city center. The cafe, with its exposed brick walls and cozy decor, was one of Henry's favorite spots. During the meal, Henry observed Ethan closely, noticing the lingering weight of the past in his eyes. It was then that he decided to make a proposal that could change everything. "I've been thinking a lot about how we can move forward," Henry began, taking a sip of his coffee. Ethan and Grace looked at him, intrigued. Henry continued, explaining that he wanted to offer Ethan the opportunity to manage the cafe. "I've always known you had a talent for fixing things and dealing with people. I think this would be a great opportunity for you to reinvent yourself," he suggested, with an encouraging smile. Ethan, surprised by the unexpected offer, remained silent for a few seconds, processing the idea. Grace, always perceptive, noticed the sparkle in her father's eyes. "Dad, that would be amazing," she exclaimed, excited about the possibility of a new life. Ethan, still a bit hesitant, asked Henry about the details of the offer. Henry explained that the cafe needed new management and that he had complete confidence in Ethan's ability to take on the challenge. "I want you to have a new chance, something that can bring you joy and a fresh start," Henry said sincerely. Ethan, touched by his brother's confidence, felt moved by the proposal. The cafe was a small place but with great potential. Henry described how he envisioned the future of the place, suggesting improvements and new ideas. Ethan, who always enjoyed challenges, began to feel excited about the prospect of working again. "I would love to contribute and be part of this," he said, with a shy smile. Henry, pleased with the response, assured him that he would be there to help with whatever was needed. "This is more than just a business. It's a chance to rebuild your life," he affirmed, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. The idea of managing the cafe brought new energy to Ethan. He knew it would be a challenge, but also an opportunity to overcome the past and build something new. Grace, ever the optimist, was already imagining how she could help with new initiatives at the cafe. "We could have live music events, or maybe even sell some of your sweets," she suggested excitedly. Henry laughed, appreciating his niece's enthusiasm. "I love that idea," he agreed, encouraging her to keep brainstorming. The family was united in a common goal, and it was a new and welcome feeling. Ethan accepted the offer, feeling lighter than he had in a long time. "Let's do this," he said with determination. The decision brought a new perspective for everyone. Henry, relieved to see Ethan finding a new path, committed to providing all the necessary support. "You're not alone in this," he assured, shaking his brother's hand. For Ethan, the opportunity to manage the cafe was not just a job, but a chance to start anew, far from the shadows of the past. Grace, for her part, was radiant, knowing her father was finally finding a purpose. With the new challenge ahead, the family began making plans. Ethan and Grace started visiting the cafe regularly, familiarizing themselves with the space and the customers. Henry, always present, helped with the business aspects while Ethan focused on learning everything about the cafe's operation. "We're going to transform this place," Ethan promised with a determined smile. Henry's offer not only brought a new opportunity for Ethan but also strengthened the family bonds, creating a new beginning for all of them. With the new responsibility of managing the cafe, Ethan and Grace moved into Henry's mansion, a place that was a stark contrast to what they were used to. The mansion, grand and full of history, was located in an upscale area of the city. Grace, upon entering for the first time, was awestruck by the grandeur of the place. "I never imagined I'd live in a place like this," she said, her eyes sparkling with admiration. Ethan, though impressed, felt a mix of emotions. The move represented a new beginning, but also an adjustment to an unfamiliar world. In the first few days, adapting to their new life was challenging. The luxury and convenience were new experiences for both of them. Grace, with her insatiable curiosity, explored every corner of the mansion, discovering new rooms, old paintings, and a lush garden. Ethan, on the other hand, felt somewhat out of place. Used to a simple life filled with hardships, he struggled to adapt to the comfort and ease now at his disposal. "It's all so different," Ethan remarked as he looked out over the garden. Henry, sensing his brother's hesitation, tried to reassure him. "You deserve this, Ethan. It's time to enjoy life," he said with a warm smile. Their new routine included family gatherings where Henry and Ethan discussed plans for the cafe and shared stories from their lives. Grace, always enthusiastic, joined in the conversations, suggesting creative ideas for the business. "We could have a themed event every month," she suggested, full of excitement. Henry and Ethan laughed, appreciating Grace's contagious energy. Slowly, the mansion began to feel less intimidating and more welcoming. Ethan, though still feeling a bit out of place, started to relax and adapt to the new reality. Grace's relationship with Henry also strengthened during this time. Henry, now more present in their lives, became a figure of support and inspiration for the young woman. He encouraged her dreams and offered valuable advice. "You have a bright future ahead, Grace," he would say, always encouraging her to follow her interests. Grace, in turn, loved listening to Henry's stories about his business ventures and the lessons he had learned along the way. Life at the mansion brought a new dynamic for everyone, creating bonds they never imagined were possible. As they adapted to their new life, Ethan also dedicated himself intensely to the cafe. He spent hours learning about management, experimenting with new recipes, and getting to know the customers. The local community quickly grew fond of him, appreciating his friendliness and dedication. "You've brought new energy to this place," a regular customer remarked. Ethan, proud of his work, felt fulfilled in a way he hadn't in a long time. The cafe wasn't just a business. It was a new lease on life. Every cup served, every smile received, was a reminder that he was on the right path. Despite the comfort of the mansion, Ethan and Grace never forgot their roots. They kept in touch with friends and neighbors from their old neighborhood, always making sure to help whenever they could. Grace, in particular, missed the simplicity of her previous life but also knew how to appreciate the new opportunities that had arisen. "We're growing, but we should never forget where we came from," she would say with maturity. Henry, proud of the growth of his new family, fully supported this attitude. "Humility is one of the greatest virtues," he agreed, always encouraging them to stay grounded. The adaptation to their new life was an ongoing process, filled with ups and downs. Ethan and Grace faced challenges and moments of uncertainty, but with Henry's support, they managed to overcome the difficulties. Gradually, the mansion ceased to be merely a symbol of wealth and became a true home, full of love and new possibilities. Each day, they felt more comfortable and confident in their new environment, ready to embrace the future with hope and determination. The new life, with all its complexities, became a setting for growth and renewal for everyone involved. After the emotional reunion with Mary, Ethan, Henry, and Grace devoted themselves to rebuilding their family bonds. The time they spent with Mary was a transformative experience, full of revelations and deep emotions. From that moment on, they decided that the best way to honor her memory would be by strengthening their unity. With this determination, they embarked on a new phase in their lives, filled with gatherings and rediscoveries. The following weeks were marked by regular visits to the cafe, where Ethan worked diligently to transform the place into a welcoming and thriving space. Henry, with his business expertise, assisted with the management, while Grace got involved with creative ideas to attract more customers. "Let's have a talent night," she suggested one day, excitedly. The idea was met with enthusiasm and soon became a monthly event. On the cafe's improvised stage, young musicians, poets, and artists from the region shared their talents, filling the space with life and joy. The family not only found a new source of income, but also a way to connect with the community. The cafe became a gathering spot where stories were exchanged and bonds were strengthened. Henry's support was crucial for Ethan and Grace's adaptation to their new reality. He not only provided guidance, but also was a constant and encouraging presence. Henry dedicated himself to teaching Ethan about the intricacies of running a business, from financial management to marketing strategies. "You're doing great, Ethan," Henry would often praise. For Ethan, these words were vital fuel, giving him the confidence that had often been lacking in his life. With each new challenge overcome, he felt more secure and ready to move forward. Grace, in turn, flourished in her new environment. The young woman, who had once faced so many difficulties, now had the opportunity to explore her passions and interests. She began to get involved in school and community activities, discovering a special talent for organization and leadership. "You have a bright future ahead of you," Henry would say, proud of his niece's accomplishments. With the support of Henry and Ethan, Grace also began to think about her own future, considering educational and career opportunities that once seemed out of reach. As they built a new life, the trio didn't forget to honor Mary's memory. On various occasions, they would sit together to reminisce about the stories and advice she had shared. "She gave us the gift of unity," Henry reflected with a wistful smile. These memories helped strengthen their bonds, reminding them of the importance of being together. Ethan, now more open and confident, also began to share more about his feelings and hopes, something he had rarely done before. "I feel like I've finally found my place," he admitted during an intimate conversation with Henry. Time passed, and gradually their new routine stabilized. The cafe thrived, and the family became a beloved presence in the community. The talent nights, organized by Grace, became a success, attracting more and more people. Ethan, seeing the cafe full of life and laughter, felt a genuine happiness he hadn't experienced in a long time. "This is all I could ever want," he said one day, watching Grace have fun with her friends. The sense of belonging and the strength of their family bonds were now a tangible reality. As they approached the end of a year filled with changes, Ethan, Henry, and Grace planned a small celebration to mark the new chapter in their lives. Gathered in the cafe, now decorated for the occasion, they reflected on everything they had been through and how much they had grown as a family. "We did it," Henry said, raising a toast to the new life they had built together. With tears in their eyes, Ethan and Grace joined the toast, feeling the depth of the moment. The journey had been long and full of challenges, but the reward of being united and happy was immeasurable.